Mexico, the Colonial Era, the Bourbon Project, page 265. In Yucatan, Confradia, lands were sold off to the benefit of local landlords and to the detriment of local cults. Some Bourbon radicals, like the Puebla intendant Manuel Flon, sought to go further, floating grand and prophetic schemes for the division and distribution of the church's massive landholding, which, they argued, stunted economic development. And in 1804, as we will see, a financially pressed government sequestered the church's chantries and charitable foundations. More generally, popular or local religion came under close official scrutiny, not simply because of the threat it posed to public order, which has been mentioned, nor because of idolatrous or diabolical character, which now gave less cause for official concern, but because it was associated with drink, degeneracy, sloth, profligacy, backwardness, incivility, and superstition, in the eyes not only of secular officials, but also of a good many Catholic clerics too. For them, the excessive cult of the saints promoted naive benefits and irrational practices. At Easter, a critical cura noted, Tarascan Indians enacted the Passion of Christ with one of their community, his face, shoulders, and body bathed in blood, playing the part of Jesus, but the cura dared not intervene for fear of provoking a riot. On a more regular basis, boozy Sundays led to San Lunes, Monday absenteeism, and sometimes further boozing, which harmed public morality and private production alike. True religion would promote instead sobriety, thrift, hard work, and individual application. Bourbon reformers and Jansenist clergy combined, therefore, in an effort to improve what today's economists would call Mexico's human capital. In doing so, they faced an uphill struggle, but they also established precedents that would be doggedly pursued throughout the 19th and 20th centuries. The single most dramatic and symbolic act of Bourbon anti-clericalism came with the expulsion of the Jesuits in 1767. Like much of Bourbon policy, this derived in part from the misguidingly doctrinaire application of peninsular policies to colonial problems. It is true that the Jesuits had carved out sizable semi-autonomous fiefs, especially in the far north, where they contested with secular officials, hacendados, and miners for control of the Indian population, the Yaquiri region being the classic case. Yet allegations of the Jesuit state within the state were somewhat misconceived and redolent of peninsular politics, where the court influence of the order was evident, to be seen evil and puffed up by international paranoia. In the north of New Spain, the Jesuit order was probably the most effective arm of the colonial state. Hence, its amputation resulted in a decline, not an enhancement, of Spanish control in that far-flung region. In addition, the expulsion of the Jesuits strained the social fabric of New Spain, compromising the legitimacy of Bourbon reformism at the very onset, in the eyes of both the masses and the often Jesuit-educated Creole elites. The peremptory expulsion order came at a touching moment, only a year after anti-tax riots had shaken the cities of the Bajío. The order, 700 in number, was expelled, and its property was confiscated and auctioned off. Here, then, was a foretaste of the great ecclesiastical sell-off which anti-clerical reformers advocated, and which the Bourbons and their 19th century liberal successors would eventually implement. It was a bold, risky, enlightening, despotic act. In the north, as we have seen, the mission communities largely collapsed. In western central Mexico, the Jesuits' summary departure left a gaping hole in the provision of charity and education. Secular substitutes were introduced, but they scarcely filled the breach, and it left 2. A legacy of resentment on the part of both the indigent poor and the educated elite. In Michoacán, over 100 Indian villages rose in protest. In Guanajuato, the mob rioted for 3 days. In San Luis Potosí, miners and Indians took to the streets, opened the gaol, looted stores, and threatened to finish off all Spaniards at once. Galvez, author of the policy, sensed a Jesuit plot to subvert the realm. He reacted in hyper-Bourbon style. The new regular army and militia were swiftly deployed, and they exacted a harsh retribution. 85 victims were hung, 73 flogged, 117 banished, and 674 gaoled. The hangings were public and exemplary, as were many lesser punishments. In one pueblo, the scribe who had recorded the communal vow of resistance had his writing hand severed. This was repression on an unprecedented scale, indicating a commitment to force majeure and an abandonment of old traditions of Habsburg religio-paternalism. It was, in Brading's words, a sharp turning point in Mexico's colonial history. This transformation even found architectural expression as the flamboyant Churrigueresque of Bahia churches, the braggart buildings, as the former Spanish reformer Jovellanos gave way to a stern national neoclassicism. A similar architectural shift was apparent in Guadalajara and Mexico City. The symbolism is plain, not merely inferential. Since the new Asiatic was ordained by the crown and proselytized by the new Royal Academy of San Carlos, 1785, neoclassicism, a genre embodying the national rigor of the state and repudiating the demotic flippery of the Churrigueresque, was to be the official style of the later Bourbons. In a variety of ways, therefore, the Bourbon reformers sought to accentuate the bonds, powerful and enduring, despite clerical exploitation and hypocrisy, which linked church to people, and in doing so was an obstinate fact, the former a risky objective. Like latter anti-clericals, the Bourbons incurred costly opposition to little purpose. The economic returns to the crown were limited, and the social repercussions serious. For all its faults, notwithstanding evidence of popular indifference or even rebellionistic cynicism, the Church enjoyed ample support, and popular Catholicism was more than a match for enlightened reform. Jansenist bishops might be disdained, but local curas were often popular, and the recruitment of Creole, even Indian priests, was brisk. Above all, the rituals and symbols of popular religion flourished. The cult of the saints, fiestas, retablos, ascetic display, religious art, and architecture. Much of the literature of the day was religious, and the petitions of the Mexico City working class, the vanguard of the colony's industrial proletariat, were steeped in Catholic terminology. Mexico showed few signs of the de-Christianization which affected some parts of 18th century Europe. Like the great tree of Toul, the Church had put down deep roots which sustained its ancient girth. Mighty blows might shake the branches, but they could not budge the trunk, and those who dealt the blows were left with weary arms and broken wills. The destruction of such an ancient organism required gradual, insidious sapping, a policy that would take time and resources. The Bourbons had neither. By 1810, it was possible for the anti-Spanish insurgents to clothe their nebulous patriotism in clerical religious terms, to invoke the Virgen of Guadalupe, whose cults the Jesuits had fostered, to assert their American identity, which Jesuit intellectualists had written up, to find many of their popular leaders among the priesthood, and to repudiate both the heretic Spanish viceroy and the ungodly afrancesado regime which he represented.